Buenos dias. Welcome to another episode of Awakening Podcast, showing you the Chinese perspective on global geopolitics. Today, I'm going to show you a video from the Chinese social media regarding the situation in Venezuela and Latin America in general. I will say it represents how Chinese intellectuals see the overall picture, geopolitical environment in Central and South America overall. In addition, I'm testing the AI translation software I'm using in Spanish this time. So I'm going to post this video in both English language and Spanish. I do not speak any Spanish myself. I mean I could ask a Latino friend of mine here to check it for me first before I post it, but I would just throw it out there in my channel and have a laugh to see how horrible it is, okay? Hold on, we got a problem. There's different kind of Spanish here. What the heck's Spain, Mexico, Peru, Puerto Rico, USA, Venezuela? Great. How would I know which version of Spanish to use? I guess I would just use Mexican Spanish because I grew up with Mexicans up in Bay Area. So get ready for some entertainment, okay, amigos?
In the southern Caribbean Sea, the sea breeze carried a hint of gunpowder as a U.S. Arleigh Burke-class destroyer launched a Tomahawk missile, sinking a Venezuelan vessel in international waters, causing 3 immediate deaths. This was the second time in 2 weeks that the U.S. military targeted pseudo-civilian vessels after deploying 10 F-35 stealth fighters. The 4,500 Marines at the Puerto Rico base, 700 kilometers from Venezuela, are ready. Defense Secretary Hexes has said this sport is America's front line. Meanwhile, Venezuelan President Maduro has cut all ties with the U.S., with 8 million militia on high alert. 2 F-16 jets flew low over the U.S. fleet, hinting at looming conflict. But have you considered if the U.S. military's frequent use of carriers and nuclear subs is really about fighting drug trafficking? If it's not because this country has the largest oil reserves globally, why is it such an issue for the United States? The U.S. government often stresses that boosting troops in the Caribbean is to fight Venezuelan drug groups, yet this claim doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Looking at the force setup, the U.S. military's deployment seems excessive. 3 Aegis destroyers, a nuclear attack submarine, an amphibious assault ship, F-35 stealth fighters, and P-8 anti-submarine aircraft. This scale can launch a full military strike against a small to medium country, not just a drug group. Typically, the U.S. Coast Guard handles international drug enforcement, not the Marine Corps with Tomahawk missiles. Oddly, the U.S. military attacked ships twice. After the incident, no drug trafficking evidence was released. Venezuelan authorities said the sunken vessel was just a fishing boat and the 11 deceased were civilians. Notably, the U.S. military fleet was near Venezuela's coastal economic zone, only a few dozen kilometers from oil facilities and ports. Anyone familiar with military strategy knows this positioning isn't mainly for capturing drug traffickers, but rather to carry out precise strikes on pseudo-critical infrastructure anytime. Seeing this, you might ask, why does the U.S. use drug enforcement as an excuse? Looking back at history, this is an old script for the U.S. In 1989, they invaded Panama to capture drug lord Noriega, and in 2003, they attacked Iraq to eliminate weapons of mass destruction. What's the real aim of the U.S. behind this anti-drug operation? To grasp today's conflict, we need to focus on a key word: oil. Venezuela holds 300 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, the world's largest, with heavy oil making up a quarter of the global total, and 6 trillion cubic meters of natural gas, ranking in the top 10 globally. This oil-rich nation has been eyed by American capital from the start. In 1914, after Dutch Shell drilled the first oil well in Lake Maracaibo, American oil firms swiftly moved in. Using tech advantages, they controlled the whole pseudo-oil chain. During WTI, Venezuela supplied almost half of the U.S. military's oil in the Caribbean. In 1947, it joined the U.S.-led Inter-American Treaty of Reciprocal Assistance, creating a model where the U.S. offered protection for oil. The shift happened in 1976 when President Perez pushed for oil nationalization, taking American firms' assets into state hands. Still, the U.S. stayed the biggest pseudo-oil buyer. A mark was left. In the 1980s, the oil price plummeted, leading to an economic collapse. Perez had to reintroduce American capital, which triggered public riots. This laid the groundwork for Chavez's rise. In 1999, Chavez, who had been imprisoned for a coup attempt, was elected president. The U.S.-Venezuela relationship shifted drastically. Chavez renationalized the oil industry, using its revenues for free healthcare and education, and aligned with Cuba to form an anti-U.S. coalition. He even planned to hand over F-16 fighter jets to Russia, angering the U.S. In 2002, the CIA attempted a coup that failed, making Chavez more resolute. After Chavez's death, Maduro maintained the anti-U.S. stance. In 2018, the Trump administration refused to recognize Maduro's election. Backing opposition leader Guaido led to a $700 million asset and a $50 million bounty for Maduro's capture. You might ask, is America's hostility towards Venezuela only due to its anti-American stance? If Venezuela dropped this stance, would the U.S. back off? Many think the U.S.'s military actions are because of Venezuela's ties with China or a pressing need for oil, but that's not true. Venezuela began ties with China and Russia a decade ago, with Russian arms arriving 2 decades ago. Since 2019, the U.S. imports and exports oil, relying less on northern oil than before. The real reason lies in the Pentagon's new draft National Defense Strategy, which prioritizes U.S. homeland and Western Hemisphere security, shifting from containing China. Simply put, the U.S. wants to shrink its defense perimeter, focus military resources in the Western Hemisphere, and build a controlled industry chain. Why? Decades of global wars have drained America's resources. Chinese military tech advances such as hypersonic weapons and stealth jets have limited its strategic space. The U.S. once relied on Japan and the EU for resources to manage crises, but those sources have now diminished. Trade with China hasn't been beneficial, so the U.S. is turning to its own backyard. Latin America is ideal for an alternative supply chain due to cheap labor, resources, and proximity. The plan is for Mexico to establish production workshops, Venezuela to supply energy, and other countries to provide raw materials and labor. This system can help alleviate immigration and drug issues at the U.S.-Mexico border. It can weaken China's manufacturing position and also consolidate the dominance of the U.S. dollar. The supply chain transactions use the U.S. dollar for settlement. Venezuela is a crucial piece of this plan, as its oil is the energy core of American manufacturing, and it is also a leader in the anti-U.S. camp in Latin America. Taking control of Venezuela would not only enable energy control but also warn other failing states, urging them to comply. At this point, you might wonder, can the U.S.'s backyard plan really be smoothly executed? Will Venezuela's resistance become a variable? From a purely military perspective, the United States has an overwhelming advantage over Venezuela. The U.S. military has deployed in the Caribbean with hundreds of Tomahawk cruise missiles, 10 F-35 fighters, as well as transport aircraft, Harrier attack aircraft, and 4,500 Marines. Their tactics are very clear, starting with stealth fighters and cruise missiles. Destroy the pseudo-air defense, bomb military sites, and send in Marines for a decapitation mission to support a puppet regime. Venezuela's strength is much weaker, with a regular army of nearly 150,000. They have Su-30 fighters and S-300 air defense, but in limited numbers. The 8 million militia are determined but lack formal training. Their only chance is guerrilla warfare in the jungle. But the U.S. military likely won't allow that, choosing a quick win through airstrikes. Yet wars aren't just about weapons. In the short term, the U.S. military might overthrow Maduro's regime, but long-term risks are significant. Latin American countries are already unhappy with U.S. intervention, and military action could spark a stronger anti-American wave, ultimately hurting the U.S.'s plan to control its backyard. Like the Vietnam and Afghanistan wars, the U.S. might win tactically but lose strategically. Importantly, Venezuela isn't alone. China's foreign ministry opposes external interference, sending electronic and medical ships to the Caribbean for intelligence and electronic warfare support. Though Russia is busy with its own issues, it might still aid Venezuela with arms. Could these factors derail the U.S.'s quick victory plan? The Caribbean conflict centers on U.S. dominance clashing with Latin American sovereignty. It's a clash of old colonial views and new era ideas. The U.S., under Christianity's guise, seeks to control oil, build an American industrial chain, and boost its dominance. Venezuela's fight isn't just to protect its regime, but also to uphold Latin American independence and dignity. The conflict's result will deeply impact Latin America's geopolitical scene. If the U.S. wins, Latin America might become an economic colony of the U.S. again. If Venezuela extends the war, it might spark an anti-American wave in Latin America, unsettling America's backyard. The stances of nations like China and Russia will be key factors. Lastly, consider this. If the US starts a full-scale war against Venezuela, what do you think could most likely tip the balance, the combined counteractions of Latin American countries and the involvement of other major powers?
Alright, that's the video. Let me know what you think. Outside of the United States being imperialistic as usual, you see how this Chinese analysts see the grand picture, right? I've been asked many times by Americans regarding how would US reindustrialize, right? Does it need to do what the Chinese are doing? Introduce state capitalism, for example, build infrastructure, promote education, and so on. Well, if you look at Trump's policy, it often takes a 2-step forward and 3-step back. In my opinion, and also said here in this video, is that it was never the intention to reindustrialize the United States. The theory goes like this, okay? Within the United States itself, the goal is to maintain a high level of financial capital return. And usually it means that the industrial capital return will be automatically diluted. Financial capital dominance is a combination of military and monetary supremacy, which I explained in my previous video. So in this kind of scenario, domestic manufacturing costs will always be too high for export. Unless US can hijack the political body of a foreign nation, which allow the United States to create sort of long-term trade imbalance and monetary dominance over that region, such as Europe at the moment. So from the perspective of the United States, it does not want to industrialize a region like South America unless it knows it won't go rogue and rebel against the US colonial ruling. China is a very good example. So in this case, the US do not want to de-risk from China while creating another China, another competition, right? So my prediction is that it is unlikely for the US to help South America to achieve high degree of industrialization unless countries in South America is willing to come under full subjugation of the United States, turning itself into a banana republic. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, and not with China increasing its trade with South America. That being said, though, will countries in South America unite against the US muddling and bullying in their politics? And even perhaps, like in this video, ask, will South America countries, unite together against US military forces? That's a question I cannot answer. Or let's address the issue in another way. Will countries in South America, Latin America, collectively impose capital control against the US dollar, like what China is doing, limit the convertibility of their own currency against the US dollar? Because when those countries start to enforce capital control, it means they truly start to wake up from neo-colonialism. There are signs of that because other day, I think the president of Brazil, Lula, requests that China and global South countries to speed up with the development of alternative payment system and perhaps currency to replace the US-centric one. I surely hope countries in South America can avoid wars in coming decades, though. I think the United States will be too busy and at the moment kind of too weak to intervene everywhere. They have to deal with Europe, in Middle East, and in East Asia to contain China and Russia. So that should give an opportunity for South Americans to achieve higher degree of autonomy without having to shed blood. Well, let me know in the comment section of your thoughts, okay? See you guys in the next video.